Hello and welcome to the presentation of the Q4 2021 Labour Force Survey or LFS results. My name is Sam Scriven and I'm a statistician in the CSO's Labour Market and Earnings Division with responsibility for compiling the LFS results. Before getting into the results for Q4 2021, let me start with a brief introduction. The Labour Force Survey is a continuous household survey carried out by the Central Statistics Office and is the official source of employment and unemployment estimates in Ireland. The official labour market classification of respondents to the Labour Force Survey is based on International Labour Organization or ILO concepts and definitions. And you can find further information about the survey from the links provided in the annex at the end of this presentation. While CSO household survey interviewers have returned to face-to-face interviewing of some respondents during the second half of 2021, LFS data for Q4 was collected by a combination of telephone and face-to-face interviewing. CSO household surveys give us a picture of the economic and social situation of the citizens of Ireland in a way and with a level of accuracy that no one else can gain. If you are asked to take part in a CSO survey, please do so. It means that when CSO figures are quoted, you know they're accurate because you told us. It's 2 years now since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic in Ireland, and there has been considerable change in how many of us work during this time period. With that in mind, this quarter's LFS results offer an opportunity to compare current labour market conditions with the final pre-pandemic quarter 2 years ago. As such, much of the emphasis in this presentation will be on comparing the results from Q4 21 with the corresponding estimates for Q4 19. The published infographic, shown in slide 2, presents the selected LFS results for Q4 2021, along with the corresponding estimates for Q4 in both 2019 and 2020. Using standard ILO criteria, the number of persons aged 15 to 89 years in employment in Q4 21 stood at 2,506,000, an increase of almost 150,000 people on Q4 19. The total number of hours worked per week in Q4 stood at 77.6 million hours per week, marginally higher than the pre-pandemic total of 77.5 million hours per week, which were worked in Q4 19. In Q4 21, the number of persons who were classified as employed but who were away from work during the reference week stood at 252,100, or 10.1% of those employed, up by just over 65,000 people when compared to Q4 19. The chart in slide 3 compares the latest ILO status estimates from Q4 21 with corresponding Q4 estimates in 2-year intervals going back to Q4 2011 to consider how current labour market conditions fit into the longer-term trend with much of the volatility of the past 2 years removed. This chart shows continued growth in employment volume over the 10-year period, as shown in the navy bars. The number of persons unemployed, shown in the orange bars, has increased relative to Q4 2019, which is the first such increase within the time frame shown. The number of persons outside the labour force in Q4 21, shown in green, has however fallen for the first time in the series presented in this chart. It should be noted that the overall height of each bar reflects the estimated population aged 15 and over for that quarter. And turning attention first to the labour market results, the ILO-defined labour force, comprised of all persons aged 15 and over who are classified as employed or unemployed, was estimated to be just over 2.63 million in Q4 21, with an associated participation rate of 65.1%. Those not in the labour force was just above 1.41 million. The chart in slide 5 shows the labour market participation volume in Q4 of each of the last 3 years on the left-hand side of the slide. Overall participation increased by 165,000 or 6.7% since Q4 19. The participation rate, labelled above the bars, increased from 62.6% in Q4 19 to 65.1% in Q4 21. The total number of persons aged 15 and over classified as outside the labour force reduced by just over 63,000 in that time period. The chart in slide 6 shows the seasonally adjusted participation rate for males, females and for all persons aged 15 and over since the beginning of 2018, and shows the decline in participation rate which coincided with when COVID-19 restrictions most impacted the labour market during Q2 of 2020, and also that participation rates by Q4 21 have now surpassed pre-pandemic levels. This is particularly the case among females, where the current participation rate of 60% is 3.6 percentage points higher than the Q4 19 value of 56.4%. The corresponding value for males at 70% in Q4 is also now higher than the Q4 2019 value by 1.2 percentage points. The number of females in the labour force increased by just over 100,000, or 9.2%, to 1.24 million between Q4 19 and Q4 21, while the number of males in the labour force at almost 1.4 million is up 4.6% on the Q4 2019 estimate. The corresponding participation rates shown in the chart increased from 56.5% to 60.1% for females and 68.9% to 70.3% for males. The chart in slide 8 looks at the participation rate by age group and shows that growth in labour market participation in all age categories since Q4 19. The highest percentage gains are among 15 to 24-year-olds, where participation increased from 46.6% to 53.3%, an increase of almost 7 percentage points. This corresponds to an additional 52,000 people in this age group in the labour force. The chart in slide 9 compares labour market participation rates in different regions. Again, we see growth relative to Q4 19 across all regions, with the highest increases seen in the Midlands region with an increase of 6.6 percentage points, and in the Midwest region with an increase of 4.9 percentage points. These significant changes in labour market participation are also reflected by changes in other LFS indicators, for example in principal economic status, which measures the respondents' own assessment of their economic status. The chart in slide 10 shows the principal economic status of all persons aged 15 and over, and as highlighted, the number of people classifying themselves principally as carrying out home duties has fallen by just over 100,000 people since Q4 19. And the vast majority of this decrease, 96,200, is attributable to females. Focusing briefly on the annual change in participation, the number of persons in the labour force in Q4 21 was up by 8.9%, or 214,800 from a year earlier, and the participation rate increased from 60.6% to 65.1% over the year. In terms of decomposing the change in the labour force, there was a positive demographic effect of 22,900 and a positive participation effect of 191,900. Meanwhile, on a seasonally adjusted basis, the labour force increased by 20,700, or 0.8% over the quarter, to just under 2.63 million in Q4 21. Turning now to employment, and as mentioned earlier, using standard ILO criteria, the number of persons aged 15 to 89 in employment in Q4 stood at 2,506,000, an increase of 150,000 on Q4 19. This is the first time that employment has exceeded 2.5 million since the series began in Q1 1998. The associated employment rate for those aged 15 to 64 is 73%. At the end of December of last year, the COVID-19 adjusted measure of employment, or the lower bound of the number of persons aged 15 to 89 years in employment, is estimated to have been just under 2.44 million, with an associated COVID-19 adjusted employment rate of 70.9%. Comparing figures now from now to 2 years ago, there has been an overall increase of 6.3%, or almost 150,000 in the number of persons in employment. The male-female breakdown, shown in the chart here, shows the number of females in employment is up by 93,200, or 8.6% since Q4 19, while the number of males is up by 55,400, or 4.4%. The chart in slide 14 shows the quarter-on-quarter changes in seasonally adjusted employment volumes for males and females since quarter 4 19. As with labour market participation, the chart shows the decline in employment volumes observed most dramatically in quarter 2 2020 and steady recovery since, with Q4 21 having now surpassed pre-pandemic levels. The chart also indicates that employment among females, which was impacted strongly at the beginning of the pandemic, has recovered strongly in recent quarters. The table in slide 15 includes detail on the number of persons who were classified as employed but were absent from work in the reference week, which, while considerably lower than observed in Q4 2020, is still almost 35% higher than in Q4 2019. The table also shows the total number of hours worked per week in millions, which, as mentioned earlier, is estimated at 77.6 million hours per week for Q4 21, up by almost 10% on the figure for Q4 20, but up only marginally by 0.1% on the figure for Q4 19. The chart in slide 16 shows the changes in employment volume by full-time and part-time for males and females. Comparing Q4 21 with Q4 19, the largest volume increase is in females working full-time, up by almost 58,000 or 7.8%. The largest percentage increases are in part-time employment, however, up by 16.1% for males and up by 10.4% for females. Part-time underemployment was nearly 110,200 and accounted for 20% of total part-time employment in Q4. The chart in slide 19 compares part-time underemployment for both males and females since Q4 19 and shows in particular that the proportion of males in part-time employment who would prefer to and are available to work more hours has reduced from 30% to 23%. Females were unchanged at 19%. The CSO were able to link the LFS data for quarter 4 with revenue data in respect of recipients of the Employment Wage Subsidy Scheme, or EWSS, and data from the Department of Social Protection for those in receipt of the Pandemic Unemployment Payment, or the PUP. This linking of data was done in accordance with CSO data matching protocols. The criteria for linking the data this quarter is based on whether the respondent was in receipt of the PUP or EWSS in the interview reference week. In quarter 4 of this year, just over 40% of persons in receipt of the PUP in the reference week were classified as employed according to ILO criteria, while the remainder were classified as unemployed and inactive in almost equal measure. The vast majority of EWSS recipients, at 95.9%, were classified as employed. Turning now to the economic sectors, and the chart in slide 19 shows employment volumes by sector for Q4 of 2019 to 2021. Employment increased across many sectors in the year to Q4 21, with the level of employment in a number of sectors exceeding the levels from the same quarter in 2019. These sectors include the information and communications sector, which was 30.9% or 39,400 higher than in Q4 21. And this was predominantly driven by increases in computer programming, consultancy and related activities, and in the professional, scientific and technical activities sector, which was up by 22.8% or 32,200 when compared to Q4 19, driven by increased employment in architectural and engineering activities, technical testing and analysis, and in scientific research and development. Some sectors have not yet recovered fully from the pandemic effects, and the most notable of these are the administrative and support service activities sector, which was 14.6% or 16,300 less in Q4 21 than it was in Q4 19, driven by falls in employment in security and investigation activities and in services to buildings and landscape activities. And in the accommodation and food services activities sector, which was down by 9.7% or 17,300 from Q4 19. The change in employment volume between Q4 19 and Q4 21 for each sector, shown as a percentage, is given in the chart in slide 22. The The table on this slide presents absences from work during the reference week for each economic sector as a percentage of share of the total employment for each sector for Q4 of 2019 through to 2021. In Q4 19, the overall absence rate was 7.9%, and this increased to 13% in Q4 20 and then decreased to 10.1% in Q4 21. Our analysis indicates an increase in the incidence of holidays as well as a rise in the incidence of sick leave, perhaps coinciding with increased levels of COVID-19 in Q4. The sector with the highest level of absence from work in the reference week was in the education sector at 16.1% of total employment for that sector. The bar chart on this slide compares the number of hours worked per week, expressed in millions, by economic sector for Q4 in each year from 2019 through to 2021. As highlighted in an earlier slide, the total number of hours worked per week in Q4 21 at 77.6 million was up only slightly on 2019 levels, but was higher than the 70.8 million hours per week worked in Q4 20. The sectors with the highest increases in terms of hours worked were in the information and communications sector and in the professional, scientific and technical activities sector, up by 1.1 million and 0.7 million hours per week respectively, while the largest decrease was observed in the administrative and support service activities sector, down by 0.9 million hours per week. Turning now to unemployment, and again using the standard ILO criteria, the number of persons aged 15 to 74 years who were unemployed in Q4 stood at 127,400, with an associated unemployment rate for those aged 15 to 74 of 4.9%. The number unemployed was down by 14,300 when compared to Q4 20, but higher by 16,900 than in the pre-pandemic Q4 19, when the unemployment rate stood at 4.5%. At the end of December 2021, the COVID-19 adjusted measure of unemployment, or the upper bound of the number of persons aged 15 to 74 years who were unemployed, was just over 195,000, with an associated COVID-19 adjusted unemployment rate of 7.4%. The chart in slide 24 shows the breakdown of persons unemployed by sex for Q4 2019 to 2021. For males, the number unemployed, 68,100, was 6,000 higher than in pre-pandemic Q4 19, while for females, there were 59,200 unemployed, 10,800 higher than 2 years earlier. The chart in slide 25 shows the seasonally adjusted unemployment rate for males, females, and for all persons aged 15 to 74 since the beginning of 2018. The seasonally adjusted unemployment rate in Q4 21 at 5.1% has fallen from the levels seen during the height of the pandemic, but remains higher than the pre-pandemic seasonally adjusted unemployment rate of 4.8% in Q4 2019. In Q4, 44,300 persons were classified as long-term unemployed, that is, persons who were unemployed for 12 months or longer, and this accounted for 34.8% of all unemployed persons. The figure for long-term unemployed was higher than both Q4 19 and Q4 20, as is shown in the chart. The long-term unemployment rate stood at 1.7% in Q4. In this short section, we look at responses to the LFS over the whole year in order to gain insight into labour market conditions over the whole year, taking into account that the overall picture might have varied at different parts of the year. This has particularly been the case over the last couple of years, with COVID-19 and associated lockdowns and restrictions heavily influencing the labour market. The chart in slide 28 shows the annual averages for the standard ILO employment classifications over the whole year for 2019 to 2021. Employment in 2021 is up on 2019, but the picture is less pronounced than as presented in the Q4 results. Employment was up in 2021 by 80,000 or 3.4% on 2019, while unemployment was significantly higher than in 2019, up by 37,000 or 30.6% over the whole year. The chart in slide 28 shows the annual averages for the standard ILO employment classifications over the whole year for 2019 to 2021. Employment in 2021 is up on 2019, but the picture is less pronounced than as presented in the Q4 results. Employment was up in 2021 by 80,000 or 3.4% on 2019, while unemployment was significantly higher than in 2019, up by 37,000 or 30.6% over the whole year. The number of persons outside the labour force was lower than in 2019, reflecting the strong growth in labour market participation seen this year. Further analysis of year-on-year annual average data can be made available to users on request. And so, in summary, using the standard ILO criteria, the number of persons aged 15 to 89 years in employment in Q4 2021 stood at 2,506,000, an increase of almost 150,000 people on Q4 19. The total number of hours worked per week in Q4 stood at 77.6 million hours per week, marginally higher than the pre-pandemic total of 77.5 million hours per week, which were worked in Q4 2019. In Q4 21, the number of persons who were classified as employed but who were away from work during the reference week stood at 252,100, or 10.1% of those employed, up by just over 65,000 people when compared to Q4 19. Thank you for your attention, and for more information, please log into cso.ie and search for labour market.